On January 15th, 1919, in the north end of Boston, something unexpected was about to happen. A massive storage tank, standing 50 feet tall and 90 feet wide, filled with molasses, sat just outside the busy neighborhood. It was owned by the Purity Distilling Company and held over 2.3 million gallons of molasses, roughly 13,000 tons of the thick, sweet liquid. This molasses was used to produce ethanol, which would be shipped out from nearby factories. However, the tank itself was flawed from the start. The construction was rushed and its design was poor, with some saying it was built with subpar materials. Right from the beginning, it leaked molasses, and locals often joked about the sticky smell in the air. But no one imagined that this small, ongoing issue would lead to a catastrophe. As winter wore on, the weather in Boston had warmed up, causing the molasses inside the tank to thin out, making it more volatile. With the tank filled to capacity, pressure began to build. The combination of overfilling and the expanding liquid caused the tank to become unstable. The molasses was no longer just a sweet, harmless substance. It was now a ticking time bomb, ready to explode, and that explosion would be unlike anything the city could prepare for. On the afternoon of January 15th, 1919, Boston's North End became the scene of unimaginable chaos. At around 12:30 p.m., without warning, the massive molasses tank that had stood in the area for months suddenly gave way. The steel walls of the tank burst open with a deafening roar, sending a wall of thick, brown liquid surging out at a terrifying speed. The molasses moved with the force of a flash flood, racing through the streets at an estimated speed of 35 miles per hour. The wave of molasses, as much as 15 feet high in places, swept through the narrow streets, overwhelming everything in its path. The streets, once bustling with life, became a slippery, sticky mess. Buildings were battered by the sheer force of the wave, while cars and horses were quickly trapped in the thick molasses. The flood struck with such speed and power that many didn't have time to react. As the molasses continued to surge through the neighborhood, it trapped people and debris alike. Several homes, warehouses, and even train tracks were engulfed. People who were unfortunate enough to be caught in the path of the flood were swept off their feet, often unable to escape the overwhelming tide. The liquid, dense and heavy, trapped victims under its weight, making it difficult for anyone to get free. As chaos unfolded, cries for help echoed through the streets, but the molasses made rescue efforts incredibly difficult. Emergency responders and bystanders struggled to wade through the thick sludge, which was as sticky as it was dangerous. People who had been swept into the flood found themselves unable to move or breathe, unable to get free from the sticky grip of the molasses that held them fast. The scene was both terrifying and surreal, as the usually peaceful neighborhood was now in the grip of an unstoppable disaster. Once the molasses flood subsided, the full extent of the devastation began to unfold. The north end of Boston was left in ruins, with wrecked buildings, overturned cars, and streets coated in a sticky, brown residue. The air was thick with the smell of molasses, which clung to everything it touched. The cleanup efforts would take weeks, but the impact of the disaster was far more than just physical. By the time the molasses flood had receded, a tragic toll had been taken. 21 people had lost their lives and over 70 others were injured. The victims came from all walks of life, from children playing in the streets to workers who had been near the tank when it collapsed. In the days that followed, the city was left to reckon with the loss of life, the destruction, and the trauma that would linger long after the molasses had been cleaned up. As the city began to recover from the chaos, the investigation into the cause of the disaster quickly became a matter of great urgency. The cause of the explosion was initially unclear, and authorities scrambled to understand how such a catastrophic event could have occurred. The molasses tank had been built by the Purity Distilling Company, a business that manufactured and stored molasses for use in alcohol production. Many speculated that the tank had been poorly constructed or improperly maintained, but it would take months for the full details to come to light. The first clue came when investigators found that the tank had been under immense pressure. The molasses inside the tank had fermented over time, which increased the pressure on the walls of the tank. This pressure likely contributed to the eventual rupture. However, the tank's design also came under scrutiny. It was revealed that the tank had been built with low-quality materials and had shown signs of weakness for months leading up to the disaster. The company had failed to take proper precautions to address these issues, even after the tank had exhibited signs of leaking. By the spring of 1919, the investigation led to a lawsuit filed against the Purity Distilling Company by the victims and their families. The case would eventually uncover not just a failure in engineering, but also a failure in oversight and accountability. The company's lack of concern for safety, as well as the poor construction of the tank, were deemed significant factors in the disaster. The legal battle would drag on for years, but the flood of molasses left an indelible mark on the city of Boston and its people, serving as a painful reminder of the deadly consequences of negligence. While the immediate aftermath of the Molasses Flood in Boston was filled with cleanup efforts and legal battles, the disaster left a long-lasting impact on the city and the surrounding community. The flood was not just a moment of chaos, but a turning point in how industrial safety and urban infrastructure would be approached moving forward. In the years that followed, Boston would make significant changes to both its building codes and its regulations regarding industrial facilities. The city's authorities, faced with public outrage and widespread fear, worked to ensure that such a tragedy would never happen again. The disaster brought into sharp focus the dangers of poorly constructed industrial structures in densely populated areas, especially those handling volatile materials. One of the major reforms that arose from the Molasses Flood was the increased scrutiny of industrial tanks and storage facilities. Prior to the flood, there were very few regulations governing the construction and maintenance of large storage tanks, particularly those used for the storage of liquids. After the disaster, the city enacted stricter guidelines for tank construction, including more rigorous inspections and higher safety standards. This was one of the first major steps in a larger movement toward industrial regulation that would continue to evolve throughout the 20th century. The impact of the flood was not just felt in Boston's legal and regulatory systems, but also in its culture. The Molasses Flood became a symbol of the dangers of unchecked industrial growth. The disaster was a stark reminder of how progress and development, if not carefully managed, could lead to devastating consequences. In many ways, the Molasses Flood was a wake-up call for other cities across the United States and around the world, highlighting the need for better planning, oversight, and accountability in industrial ventures. Additionally, the memory of the Molasses Flood lingered in the collective consciousness of Boston residents. Many still remembered the eerie, sickly sweet smell that lingered in the air for weeks after the event. The flood was also a focal point for discussions about urban safety, as it was clear that cities needed to prioritize the safety of their residents as they continued to grow and industrialize. The flood would be remembered not just for its immediate tragedy, but for its role in shaping the future of urban planning and industrial regulation. The Purity Distilling Company, responsible for the tank, would eventually be absorbed by the American Molasses Company, which faced ongoing scrutiny in the wake of the disaster. Although the company never fully recovered its reputation, the incident left an indelible mark on the history of industrial accidents in the United States. The tragedy of the Molasses Flood would be remembered as one of the strangest and most devastating industrial disasters in American history, reminding future generations of the importance of safety and responsibility in industrial design. The Boston Molasses Flood of 1917 may have been a forgotten disaster for many years, but its effects continue to echo throughout history. As one of the most unusual and deadly industrial accidents in American history, the tragedy captured the imagination of people everywhere. Over time, the memory of the disaster faded from public consciousness, but it left behind lasting lessons on the importance of safety in industrial design, urban planning, and regulatory oversight. In the years following the disaster, legal actions were taken against the companies involved, though many of the victims' families faced years of legal battles and little to no compensation. The outcome of these cases varied, but the publicity surrounding the flood helped shape the future of industrial regulation in the United States. The government, as well as businesses, recognized the need for increased safety measures and better oversight in the face of rapid industrial growth. The site of the disaster, which had once been a bustling industrial area, would later be redeveloped. Over time, it became home to various residential and commercial buildings. The Molasses Flood's exact location is now near the site of what is today known as the North End of Boston. The tragic events of that day may be distant in the past, but they remain an integral part of the city's history, symbolizing both the dangers of industrial negligence and the strength of a community in the face of adversity. Although many people associate the flood with its shocking and grotesque details, molasses coating streets and buildings, the sickening smell, the loss of lives, its legacy is not solely defined by the immediate horror. The Molasses Flood helped spark a broader movement towards stronger industrial safety laws, especially in the years following the flood. The public's outrage played a key role in demanding change and pushed forward the evolution of workplace safety, labor rights, and environmental protections. To this day, the Molasses Flood is often cited as an example of what can go wrong when regulatory systems fail to anticipate the dangers of industrial operations. It is a reminder that no matter how commonplace or benign a product might seem, when handled recklessly, it can have disastrous consequences. Though the flood is long over, the lessons learned from it continue to guide policy, law, and industrial safety standards to this day. The Molasses Flood, while an almost surreal and tragic event, stands as a reminder of how powerful and dangerous human innovation can be when safety is neglected. It serves as a testament to the resilience of the people of Boston who rebuilt their city and, in time, turned an era of disaster into one of progress, ensuring that future generations would learn from the past. The memory of the Molasses Flood will always remain a crucial chapter in the history of Boston and a warning to others about the importance of safety in the face of rapid industrialization.